Hi everyone, welcome to episode 68 of the Startup Playbook podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. My guest for today's episode is Frank Arrigo, the Evangelism and Ecosystem Engagement Lead at Telstra CTO. Prior to Telstra, Frank had been with Microsoft for over 20 years across the US and Australia in a number of senior roles, including Microsoft's developer and platform evangelism team and being the first CTO of the ninemsn joint venture in Australia. Along with his role at Telstra, Frank actively mentors and advises a number of startups through Telstra's muru-D accelerator program and CSIRO's ON innovation program. In this interview, we discuss the limitation of goal setting, finding early adopters for new technologies, building tribes, atoms versus bits, and the importance of learning. Without further ado, here is my interview with Frank Arrigo. Hi Frank, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Rohit, it's a pleasure.
So Frank, for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Oh, sure. My story started in 1963 when little Frank was born. Fast forward to the late 70s, early 80s. I graduated, did computer science at is now Monash University. Worked for a company here in Melbourne called Aspect Computing. I was their first ever graduate. They discovered graduates were really cheap people to hire way back then. Did a bunch of things in tech, mainframes, minis, PCs. It was old school computing, right? And I have many happy memories of working in Melbourne, working for Bureau of Meteorology, doing stuff with punch cards. It's crazy days back then. But I joined Microsoft in 91. That was really the big shift for me. And I met a girl and we moved to Canberra and I became part of Microsoft back then. And that was the early days of Microsoft when Microsoft was a bit of an underdog. And in Canberra, we did a lot of interesting things. We introduced Excel. I still remember doing the budget, using Excel and publishing the budget paper on budget. And I was very, very exciting doing that. Spent a couple of years in Canberra, started a family there. 2 kids were born. Then I moved to Seattle. Got to work at Microsoft in the Executive Briefing Center, moved there in 93. Got to do stuff with Bill Gates at the time. Prepared him and other executives for customer meetings. Did that for a year in the EBC, so I was sort of the connection between the company and the customers as they were coming to do the tours. And we talked about technology and the value of technology and what it meant to them. And I've always found myself at that intersection of technology and the application of technology, even though I'm a technology geek. Did a bunch of that. Then I transitioned into a group that was doing, at the time, it's called interactive TV, because they thought, Rohit, way back then, that you could get onto this information superhighway on your television, right? I bet you haven't heard that term for a while.
It's been a while.
So I was involved in the interactive TV trials that Microsoft was doing, and we worked with cable companies, and actually we worked with Telstra at the time, and a bunch of other companies around the world rolling out this interactive TV. And it was basically on-demand TV. That's what it was, on-demand movies. And rolling a network out. Now, at the same time, serendipitously, there was a lot of cable stuff happening in the US, and they introduced cable modems. And they said, we can deliver the internet over cable. And so I got caught up in some of those trials as well. And it was the birth of the browser. And I remember we were at a conference. It was the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters. And we were talking about our interactive TV platform, but the thing that everyone was excited was this thing called Mosaic, running on a computer over a cable modem and having access to streaming movies and pictures and all this stuff. And like, that's kind of intriguing. What's going on here? And that was the birth of the internet in a lot of ways in terms of the consumer internet. And then I came back to Australia after a part of that to join, at the time, it's 1995. This is the picture. Microsoft rolls out Windows 95 and they built a service called MSN. And in Australia, I came to be the CTO for MSN. And MSN was a closed network. It was like AOL and CompuServe. It wasn't like the internet. It was closed. But it very quickly shifted and became an internet platform. And Telstra was in partnership and they created Big Pond, which became a dial-up internet service provider. And then I got caught up in all that excitement, and a company called ninemsn was formed. And that was a partnership between Microsoft and at the time PBL, which was Channel 9 and a bunch of other media properties. And we were the first big online portal, internet portal, 97. And we were bringing the internet to Australia through dial-up 28.8.
Wow.
Yep, I can still hear the noise of those modems tingling. But it was bringing the internet, and we were trying to bring entertainment. You know, I still remember doing programming using Flash and doing streaming stuff and bootstrapping the web development industry, because people didn't know about web development. I remember teaching HTML to people. And we bootstrapped the web hosting business because there were no such thing as hosters. And we started working for a company in Adelaide called Hostworks, who provided hosting for ninemsn. And I still remember the pitch that we did a talk to our shareholders that included James Packer and a bunch of others, and they asked, why Adelaide? Why are you putting this data centre? Because everyone lives in Sydney or Melbourne. I goes, well, if it was in Sydney, the people in Melbourne have a shit experience. And if it was in Melbourne, the people in Sydney would have a shit experience. So put it in Adelaide, where there's no traffic either way, and the experience is the same. I convinced them, and it was fantastic. And so we were able to run through that. So I did ninemsn for a couple of years. And that was really the birth of the internet. That was the internet, consumer services, consumer online stuff. And then I came back to doing some other things for Microsoft around digital media. It was the start of the streaming music space, and I was involved in licensing the Windows Media format, WMA, to a company called Creative Labs in Singapore. And they built a product called the Creative Labs Jukebox, which is a little portable music player with a hard disk that played music. Oh, revolutionary, right? But the problem was, in Australia, to download that music cost more than actually buying the record, because we were metered. Right, so this digital download stuff wasn't that big yet, because you needed broadband to really bring the music. So I remember working with companies who wanted to do these jukeboxes in record stores where you could go and plug in your music player and download the music. I'm thinking, why do that? Like, what's the value? It costs the same as actually buying a CD. You know, the economics didn't work. So anyway, I was involved in a lot of that digital media, digital music stuff, and then MP3 came along and destroyed the world, right? For part of it. And then we saw the iPod kick in and sort of drive a lot of that adoption of music. And at the same time, we started seeing broadband coming in and driving the download capability. So sometimes it's serendipity to bring some of these things together. Anyway, zip forward from my ninemsn and digital media days. Then we got into the language wars. So it was all about Java, open source, and Microsoft needed to play, because I'm still at Microsoft. And they introduced the languages called .NET, which is this developer environment. And so it was all about Java, .NET. This was early 2000s. And I remember working with a company out of Sydney who became Kazaa. Do you remember Kazaa?
I do.
So wow. Kazaa was written in .NET. And it was all about moving music around MP3 formats. But it was all illegal. And so it was really hard to help support these guys. You know, I couldn't put marketing dollars or whatever because I'm supporting this illegal downloading of music. But anyway, it was all good. But that's where I met people like Mick Lebinskas and Phil Maul, because they were part of Kazaa. So I did the developer stuff. We built up, and then that moved to cloud services, a bunch of other bits and pieces. And I was doing my developer evangelism, built a team, moved to the US. 10 years ago, I moved to Seattle. Again, had a second stint there. And then I was responsible for the evangelism profession within Microsoft. So evangelism became a core part of what Microsoft is about. And evangelism is about that early adoption of technology. It's how you get people to understand what they can do with technology, help them see the value of it, help them get successful with it, and let them run with it, right? And build these advocates out there. So started in evangelism stuff. And I was set. You know, I lived in Seattle. My family loved it. I had broadband, fiber to the home in 2007. How good's that, Life was good, And actually, I heard about this NBN thing happening in Australia in 2007. I thought, that's kind of good. Australia's going to catch up, We'll talk about that in a moment. But I was in Seattle for a couple of years, and then family got sick because I'm originally from Melbourne. I heard about my dad. He wasn't well. We packed up and moved back to Australia. Eldest son, Italian family, the responsibilities on my shoulders. So we came back home, and I did my looked after this evangelism community from Melbourne. Did that for a couple of years. It was great. Also got to know the local scene in Melbourne, got to know the local startup scene, got to meet the guys at YBF. I had some good friends there. that I'd known during my Microsoft time. I also got involved in the Imagine Cup, which is a program Microsoft does for university students to sort of worldwide competition. And so I got embedded in the ecosystem. I've always been an ecosystem guy. I think that's really where that plays. And so it was great to be part of that and contribute it and be part of the local group. But after a couple of years, my managers changed. And I don't know how you've experienced your work career, but when managers change, they bring different approaches. So the guy that approved me to work and live in Melbourne moved on. A new guy comes on and he goes, what are you doing in Melbourne? Come back to Seattle. I'm like, mate, no way. I've got 4 kids. They're at uni. They're at high school. Life's kind of complicated. I'm not packing up for a third time to move. And then go, well, I guess it's time to say goodbye. And so 2013, September, around about this time, I left Microsoft. After a long innings, I loved my time there. And I had a little break. I sort of said, okay, what am I going to do? I surveyed the scene, and then someone tapped my shoulder and I said, do you want to work for Telstra? I go, no. I was offered a job as a graduate in 1984 to come to Telecom Australia. I said no then. I'm going to say no again, 30 years later. But then I met a very interesting person that had just come on board at Telstra. She was driving. Her name was Charlotte Yarconi. She was part of a new group that was trying to change the culture. And that piqued my interest. Big thing that they put together was muru-D, Startup Accelerator, help Australian companies go global. And you get to a certain age when it's not just about your career, but it's about how you can impact and help others be great. And I was at that age. And so I said, oh yeah, I want to do that. And Telstra can actually help these Australian companies go global. And I was doing that at Microsoft, but now I can do it from an Australian company. That sounds good. Yes, I'll come to Telstra. So 2014, I started. I just celebrated like a couple of weeks ago my 1337th day at Telstra, 1337, a very geeky number.
Congratulations.
1337, did a little post about that. But it's a 3.5 years down the road. I came to Telstra to do the API strategy. Had a great team that I worked with. We sort of, the strategy was easy, but sort of selling it across took a while, but we did well. It got embedded in the business. And then about a year ago, the person that recruited me left Telstra. She was American. She ended up back in Seattle. She's at Microsoft. We did a swap. And so she's a corporate VP there in the Azure team, working for a guy called Scott Guthrie. She's got a great job over there. But I feel like my mother, our parents abandoned us, But it's all good because we got picked up by a very loving family. And we moved into this chief technology office, and I joined a team here in September last year. It's come just past a year now, and I'm part of the innovation team. And I'm working on ecosystems. So I like to think of everything that I've done leading up to this has helped me to be able to do what I need to do going forward. So I'm kind of happy about that. I also describe myself as the Forrest Gump of tech, right place, right time, but make the best of it. So it's a long-winded story to sort of tell us to how I got here, but that's how I got here.
That's it's an incredible story and so much that I want to unpack. But so you mentioned that everything that you had done had sort of led you up to the point that you're at now to be able to execute on what you're doing. But going back to the start, obviously the environment would have been very, very different there, where technology is just so accessible and we take so much for granted. What was it like for you getting started in the industry? And what initially got you interested in tech in the first place? Great
question. So I go back to before I graduated. And I tell you, what got me going was a great teacher. I went to a local school here in Melbourne, Christian Brothers, East St Kilda, and same school that Eddie Maguire went to. And don't know why I mentioned that, but anyway. Daryl Summers also went to CBC St Kilda.
There you go.
They're the alumni that they have posters of. They don't have one of me yet, but maybe that'll change. Had a great math teacher. Mrs. Fagan was her name. And in year 11, she got the school to buy, when I was in year 11, she got the school to buy a computer. It wasn't a PC. It was like some CP/M-based huge floppy disk system. And I was one of the guys that got to look after it and help people with problems. And, I learnt BASIC. And, my first program, I swear to God, I printed out a picture of Alfred E. Newman, which is this character from Mad Magazine in ASCII characters, right, on a dot matrix printer. That was the first piece of software I ever wrote, a program. But that's what piqued my interest, because before then, I wanted to do pharmacy. Go to pharmacy college, open up a chemist like a good Italian boy. That's what my parents wanted me to be a pharmacist or be a doctor, traditional business. But my math teacher really piqued this interest. And then I signed up for a computer science degree. It was called Electronic Data Processing back then, very sexy title. And did my degree, graduated, and so that got me going. But it gets down to that teacher. She's the one who put this in front of me and got me interested by it. And I think what appealed to me was the fact that you can make it do anything. You could use the software to create anything. That's pretty awesome, right? In fact, I did the Alfred E. Newman. I'm pretty sure I did a Playboy bunny as well, because there was this basic code in Mad magazine that could say, type this in and out comes these things. So that's what I did, and got me going. But technology wasn't that accessible. And during my uni days, first year we were using punch cards. Second year the PC came out, and we had a piece. And then I remember third year, we were the first group that were using PCs, and this was the IBM PC.
Wow.
Right, with floppy disk only. Right, so that was the start of it all, and I've ridden that wave ever since.
Speaking of the start, you mentioned that you were the first CTO for ninemsn. You were early at Microsoft as well. What did you learn from those kind of early experiences and kind of seeing how they developed and grew over time? Yeah,
look, I think I learnt how to learn, right? That sort of that constant learner approach. I've always been a curious little fella. So, knowing that, you need to learn. So I think about when we started at Microsoft, I started in Canberra. I was their first technical person that they hired. They'd hired a salesperson, an office manager. They give me a PC. And to do email, I had to use Unix, right? I had to log on, it's command line. All right, where's the book to tell me how to do this? But I worked it all out. And I think that's always been the constant part of the job, is you have to learn how to learn. The other thing that I developed for me is I like making the rules. I like that blank sheet of paper where it's not defined yet. So ninemsn, first CTO, what the fuck? What do I have to do? Let's invent that. So I've really enjoyed the inventing part of it and the creating it. I can't execute someone else's plan. I also know what I don't like, and that's one. I like creating the plan. And I think that's the greatest gift for me, is I've had opportunities to have that blank sheet of paper. I had to define what evangelism looks like for Microsoft. That didn't exist. It wasn't a career path. There was no way forward for people who are evangelists, and I helped shape that. So I think that's been one of the recurring themes in my career, and I put that down to being curious and always learning.
I think that the 2 points that you mentioned there are things that I kind of harp on about in a few of the episodes. So obviously kind of knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, which you kind of touched on, and the focus on learning. And you mentioned that, everything that kind of happened to your career, again, has kind of led you to the point that you're at now. How did you sort of go about approaching that? Was there a very clear, this is my end point and this is kind of the process of going about there? Because I feel for me, everything has been very accidental, and often the best things that I've done have been completely by accident, and it's been serendipity, and it's just been me being in the right place at the right time. What was that sort of like for you?
Exactly the same. There was no plan. I got married, got some kids, got the job, moved forward, but it wasn't in 5 years I want to be here, and 10 years I want to be there. Because I think if you do that, on one hand, it's great to have goals, but it limits you. It limits you to the possibilities that you haven't thought about. Like I said, I call myself the Forrest Gump of tech, right place, right time. But it's about making the best of that opportunity. Those opportunities always present themselves. That door is always opening. It's how you walk through it and take advantage of it. And so, they also say you make your own luck, right? And that's about being curious and open to the possibilities. So it's a little bit of serendipity, but it's also you walk through the door to do it, and so you leave yourself open. I think my wife and I, we're always we've been married 26 years, I guess. We've got 4 kids.
Congratulations.
Eldest is 26, youngest is yet 17, going through year 11. And I tell my kids, find something that you love as your job. because then it's not a job. And hopefully, that's how I like to think about what I've done. I've loved tech. I've liked to be in this mix. That's what I love. And I get paid to do it. That's pretty cool.
That's very cool. In terms of I feel like I'm very fortunate to have found very early on what I am extremely passionate about. I recognize that not everyone knows those things. For someone who doesn't know, how should they start opening themselves up to opportunities or finding what they're passionate about?
I think it really is that be curious thing and not lock yourself out from possibilities. I look at, an example of that is everyone talks about the STEM challenge that we've got. The numbers are going down, your kids aren't going to STEM. If you go all the way to primary school and you put a computer and coding in front of boys and girls, they love it. They're playing, they're enjoying, they're exploring, they're trying things out because they have an open mind, right? Something happens along the way that points them down a pathway that locks their opportunities. Whether it's a teacher, it's an experience, it's a parent, it's support, the people around them. But stuff shapes their view. But when you look at them at the purest form, they're open to it. And so how can we keep being like those kids, right? How can we be open to it rather than lock those opportunities? It's a hard one to answer. But I think it comes down to the person, and how they, are they a glass half full person or a glass half empty kind of person, what that personality type is and how they deal with that. But everyone's possible. The potential's there. Every child is born, can speak any language, can do anything. The potential of that raw material is great. It's all of the experiences that then shut down the pathways for them to do it.
Absolutely. I think it's almost like going back to, again, the focus on learning and not being set on what the medium is of that delivery. So, for example, for me, I had no idea that I would launch a podcast, for example. I just really like learning, and the best way for me to learn is to speak to other people and pick their brain. Podcast just happened to be the medium that I delivered that in. Whether that changes down the line as well, I don't know. But this is just and it's one of the best things that's kind of happened to me. And again, I didn't go in with the indication of I have to launch a podcast because it will lead to X. So, really, really kind of interesting. I guess kind of moving a little bit forward, and you've spoken a little bit about evangelism and how that helps shape people getting early adopters excited or interested in a product. And obviously you've kind of been through sort of multiple cycles of change in technology. So first of all, I just wanted to kind of pick your brain around, what have been some of the commonalities between, when there's that sort of early adopter, the information superhighway, to what kind of leads the transition of that early piece of technology, that sort of groundbreaking innovation, to that being adopted at a more sort of mainstream level?
Yeah, the classic distribution curve. And I think we find this people that, just love their early adopters. They try everything new, the new shiny thing, and they move on. So the question is, how do you move forward to get to a broader adoption? And if I think about the experiences that we've had with our technology adoption pathways, you get your success, you tell that story breeds more success, and momentum builds, right? And then people follow. There are a lot of fast followers that follow that as an example. So it's just a question of getting those early adopters to be successful, to share their story. There's so many examples of early adopters that actually had better technology, but they just couldn't share. Microsoft's an example of that, where they just couldn't get that momentum. And that, they had media centers, they had media players, they had a lot of that stuff, but something was missing in the ingredient that didn't make it mainstream, to make it grow. And I think part of that is it's more art than science, but it's about building a bit of a momentum around that story, people understanding it. I'm a fan of a guy called Seth Godin.
Seth Godin.
His whole tribe stuff. So for me, it's about finding tribes, finding people that are passionate about that thing and then using that power to sort of build momentum. And actually, a lesson I've also learned was when I work with people, you have the advocates, but you also have the contrarians, the people that are against you. I learned early on to ignore those folks and to find the people on the fence, because the people on the fence can shift. The contrarians will eventually catch up. But if you put your effort, I remember having this conversation in the whole Java.net stuff. If I was battling the Java advocates, no one would ever win because it's a religious war. But the guys that were on the fence that weren't quite sure, you could help sway, and then that builds the momentum. So it's about picking your battles, I guess, is the simplest way of putting it. Some of the other bit in terms of some of this technology adoption, it really does come down to timing. No matter what you do as the evangelist and building a tribe, if the conditions aren't right, it ain't going to work. Right, so sometimes it's the zeitgeist that helps deliver some of that. But being able to read that, understand that, having that peripheral vision of knowing what's going on can also help drive that adoption. But, you know, I think of the whole broadband space discussion and the download music. And, you know, I mentioned my little, I had fibre to the home 10 years ago when I was in Seattle. NBN got announced here in Australia. You know, that's slowly happening now. You know, they passed half the homes. People are starting to do that. As soon as people have broadband, they have great connectivity, more things start happening, and they'll start thinking about other possibilities that can come from it. Just one
of the things that I wanted to pick out from that was, you know, the energy that startups focus on trying to sell to the unsellable, who just aren't ready. I had a meeting with a founder earlier this week who was like, how do I sell to these people? No matter what I try, they just won't buy. Yep. And it's like, shift your focus.
Yeah.
You know,
talk to someone else.
you have limited resources, whether that's finance or time or whatever. You just want to optimize that to get the greatest return. And so if you're trying to spend all of your time converting someone who will just never convert, move on, find something else. So on that, you know, if someone's struggling to find their sort of early adopters or are struggling to go through that process, you know, I feel like there's this whole thing in startups about persistence. Like, you just need to persist, and you know, you will eventually come out the other side, which works to a certain degree. But when do you know when to stop persisting and to pivot or to move on?
Yeah, well, for me, it's a hard one because I've never been in a startup. So I've been a mentor and an advisor for startups. So I've sort of seen it on the outside, but I haven't experienced it. So I just want to put that there. You know, I don't want to be sounding like an expert for something I've never done. But when I work with my teams, it really is when you're not getting traction. When that traction, you know, no matter whatever hypothesis you put out there, you've tried to test, it keeps failing. You got to try a different hypothesis. You got to shift. You know, Mick Lebinskas has a term called FLEARN, you know, fail and learn. So that something's failed, what's that lesson you've learned from there, and how can you adjust it? How can you how can you do a mini pivot? How can you change a little bit? Because sometimes a pivot it's incremental change that you need to test. Because if you keep doing the same hypothesis and it keeps failing, then you're not learning. There's something wrong with you, right? But if you're doing different things and you're slowly adjusting, eventually, if the idea is solid, it will you'll do the course correction that you need to do to get to where you got to go. So I think it's that learn mentality, test, learn, iterate, and just persist on that. It's just not persistent on the same question, but, you know, review that question and adjust it. So that's been my suggestion and my advice to the startups I work with, and I see it in action in a lot of them, and I've seen them pivot as a result. You know, so I've been a mentor with muru-D. I mentioned muru-D earlier. That's Telstra Startup Accelerator. And, you know, I've worked with a bunch of them, and they start, I remember, we sit with them at the start and they say, this is what we're going to do. And as we evolve around, they sort of zero in on the focus to what it is that they want to go after, prove it or disprove it, and then continue on. And that can happen very quickly. It can happen in a matter of weeks. It's not a long-term thing. You can move very quick, especially as a startup. You have that agility and that ability to do it. So I think that's a positive that you can do that, but you've got to apply that learning. I think that's the fundamental learn That's hashtag Flern. That's the key piece.
I'm going to make that the subject of this this episode. So you mentioned that you mentor and advise at muru-D, and I know that you mentor and advise a number of other startups outside of that as well. And one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, how do I get a mentor or advisor for my business? So I was wondering, and I'm sure you've got no shortage of companies that you see. What makes you interested enough, or what's kind of the tipping point for you to want to get more involved from an advisor capacity?
Yeah, look, part of this is something that got reinforced with me with another dear friend, Annie Parker, who now heads up Fishburners, but helped set up muru-D, and it's about pay it forward. For me, it's about how can I share my knowledge, my wisdom, my experience, whatever, the stuff I've done, because some of these patterns repeat with others who are happy to do it. And honestly, I don't want anything in return, because what I want to do is I want to pay it forward. I want them to return that favour to someone else down the road, number one. But I also want to see Australian companies thrive. I have a rant, and I'm going to do it now, I think. I think about Australia. Australia grew up far away from everything. Tyranny of distance was a big thing that we used to talk about at school, and it's true. It took a long time to get stuff here on a boat, even on a plane, and because it's about atoms. Atoms take time to move around. But as we now move to digital, and it's been digital for a while, right? We're talking about bits that move at the speed of light. Australia's part of the global economy, as a result, we're not that far away. So tyranny of distance is not a problem. Australian companies can compete globally. They can deliver services globally from anywhere in Australia. And we're not seeing that at the big end of town. We're seeing that at the startups and the small and medium business. We see companies like Envato, love those guys, Redbubble, Culture Amp, great Melbourne companies that are playing on the world stage out of Melbourne. And but where are our big guys doing that stuff? And so that's the reason I mentor is I want to see hundreds of these companies thrive and grow. Because I'm a parent. I've got 4 kids. They're all, they're now in their 20s and late teens. I want them to have a career. I want them to have a future. I want all of our children. I want your children, Rohit, when you have children, to have a few, unless you already have one. I don't know.
I don't have kids.
So I want all of our children and our children's children to have a future. And I think that's part of a duty that I have. And also why I'm at a company like Telstra, that is a big Australian iconic company, that we can do that. And muru-D's mission is all about creating great founders that can go global. And it really was an attractor that brought me to Telstra to be part of that and contribute to that. And that's why I do it. That's my personal story. Others, for other reasons, some might have financial gain. I've lost more money than I made on my mentoring and advising, but I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it for the good of the country over long term. Now, maybe that's a bit too altruistic. Maybe I'm a dreamer. I don't know. But that's why I do it. And I get involved in programs like muru-D. I'm also involved with CSIRO's ON accelerator program, which is an amazing initiative that CSIRO's put together to help our researchers and our PhD graduates at universities to really think about commercialization and taking these great ideas and bringing it forward, talking to customers, testing, validating. And CSIRO's got money to help support and drive it, because Australia can compete on the global level. We just need that support and that willingness. And there are great mentors around. I just love to see more of them contribute. Silicon Valley is all about pay it forward. I'd love to see that in Australia more. Absolutely.
I mean, one of the biggest things that I've seen from when I first started my first tech startup in Australia was just the sheer number of people that have gone through that process. You've just got more, as you said, just more people that have the ability to mentor the new wave of entrepreneurs that are coming through. But just to kind of pick on a point, because obviously, you can't mentor and spend time with everyone.
That's true.
How do you choose between companies that you want to get more involved in? Is there something specifically that you look for, or is it?
Well, look, I look at what things I have that I can help them with. Because, I don't know everything. I'm not a walking FAQ on all things startup or whatever. But my background has been around software. It's been around technology adoption. It's around a developer ecosystem. So if those are the things, it's around platforms. So if those are the things that the startup is working on, looking at, wanting to know more about, that's where I can help. If I can't add value, it's pointless. Why waste their time? Because their time is precious as well, as is mine. But if I can help with the experience that I've had in those areas, that's what I look to contribute. So that's part one. Second part is, you're right, I can't work with very startups as much as I'd love to. I've got a day job. But so I try and align it to groups and associations related to my job. So muru-D is part of Telstra. It's a no-brainer. Here in Melbourne, we actually have a cohort sitting in this building with us. So it's pretty easy. We can chat in the kitchen. CSIRO, who doesn't want to help CSIRO? Come on, it's an Australian institution, you know. It's an honour to support stuff like CSIRO and be part of that. And that's about helping Australia for the next 100 years. It's a calling, you know. Got to be part of that. My nation calls for me to serve. Absolutely. And I'm happy to do that.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the things that you touched on a little bit earlier was that, you know, you weren't intending to jump back into corporate or Telstra specifically. Mm-hmm. What made you want to get involved? Yeah, look,
I touched on it a little bit earlier on. And what made me want to get involved was I wanted to be part of someone that could help the local community and ecosystem. And Telstra is a large corporate that has a great social responsibility, touches basically every Australian, touches most businesses. So the impact and the reach is there. And it also, itself wants to transform. It wants to move from being just pure communications to a technology company. And so its aspirations match with what I want. You know, my skill set, I'm a technology guy. I'm not a telco guy, I'm a technology guy. It's a difference. So it's a nice fit. And like I said earlier, I have 4 kids. I want to make sure there's a technology industry for them as they graduate and they move forward. And Telstra can do that. Telstra can impact that. And in the role that I have, I sit at that intersection between higher ed, startups, government, our customers, our strategic partners. And I want to help drive collaboration across all those things. Because Australia, I don't know if you've noticed, but Australia ranks really low on the whole collaboration index with other countries, I should say. And Telstra, as a large corporate, can actually be an example on how to collaborate and how to work better with higher ed, government, etc., around innovation. And if I can help move the needle on that, I feel like I've done my civic duty.
Final question to kind of finish up. Obviously, as you mentioned, Telstra is in a really unique position, and specifically your role in that the effects that it plays in terms of the total startup ecosystem. Overall, you see a lot that's kind of happening, and you touch a lot within the space. What would you like to see more of or change within the ecosystem?
What I would like to see more of is more collaboration. I'd like to see a little bit more risk-taking in corporate Australia to bring on startup solutions to help address problems. That would be nice to see. And we're seeing examples of that, but I'd like to see more. What I'd like to see less of, and actually, because it's not about money for startups, it's actually about customers. Because the customers pay money.
100%.
Right? So it's not just more funds, but it's more customers. In terms of what I want to stop, the hype about startups, because at the end of the day, a startup's a small business. That's what it is. You know, it's not a silver bullet. It's not something magic. It's a small business. Australia's been built by small business. That's the heart and soul. Sure, the small business should be shops and little factories and haberdasheries or whatever, but now it is the tech space. And I would love to see these small businesses flourish all over the country, not just in Melbourne or Sydney, and that's the capital cities, but in the bush, in Ballarat, in, you know, Shepparton, Wangaratta, because the digital divide, gone. Bits move fast. You can be anywhere. And the opportunities that it presents for society, for Australia, is amazing. So I'd love to see that. So stop you know, the hype on startups because they're small businesses. Just help them. Help them succeed. And the way you help them succeed is give them customers.
Fantastic. On that note, Frank, thanks so much for your time and for sharing your insights and your experiences today. For anyone that wants to get in touch, say hello, find out more, what's the best way for them to do that?
Look, I'm all over social, but on Twitter I'm Frank R. So just feel free to at Frank R, and we can chat that way and we can get going on there.
I'll make sure I put that link in the show notes. Frank, once again, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to episode 68 of the Startup Playbook podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Frank, along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at episode 69 next week.